Ancient Egypt is often perceived as something exotic, yet its influence is still felt today. Many civilizations, such as Greece, Rome, and the peoples of the Middle East, drew inspiration from Egypt's achievements, which for them were already ancient, dating back thousands of years. In this video, we will talk about the afterlife, the soul, and how to deceive God, all related to the Egyptian Book of the Dead. When and how did this book appear? What does it represent? And how did it shape worldview of various peoples, including us? You will find out all this in the next few minutes. Essentially, the Book of the Dead is simultaneously a religious work and not quite. In one of our previous videos about Egyptian mythology, we already explained its brief meaning. The Egyptians believed that after death, each person had to go through a series of tests and be judged by the gods. The Book of the Dead served as a kind of guide, showing what to do so as not to get lost and to avoid hell. This explanation is sufficient for general understanding. But we decided to delve deeper into this topic. So let's explore the details. It's important to clarify that the name Book of the Dead appeared in Europe. The original Egyptian name is the Book of Going Forth by Day. Remember that Egyptians built entire tomb passages with instructions and signs indicating that the text was intended for the deceased. This all makes sense now. Many think that the Book of the Dead is a collection of prayers and songs for funerals and memorial ceremonies. However, in reality, the book was meant for the deceased themselves. Even during life, a person was supposed to memorize it, and after death, use that knowledge. To be prepared, copies of the book were placed in the tomb with the deceased. The book contained not only instructions but also descriptions of various rituals and the afterlife. It's worth noting that the Book of the Dead doesn't have a single fixed version. All archaeological finds show different variations, sometimes minor, sometimes quite significant. Besides the main text, there were other funerary scripts that were sometimes included. The Book of the Dead isn't a single work, but rather a collection of about 200 chapters, often disconnected from each other, more like separate songs, prayers, and legends later written on papyri or coffins. This was a common practice at the time. For example, Sumerian legends later became part of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Egyptians combined their myths into stories about Osiris, and among Semitic peoples, fragmented myths eventually formed part of the Bible. Modern historians typically refer to the Book of the Dead as a unified work, but in fact, there are different versions from the Old Kingdom and the Ptolemaic period, separated by over 2,000 years. Thus, the Book of the Dead isn't a book in the conventional sense, but more of a tradition or template for creating funerary texts. Each copy was personalized, depending on the deceased's profession, social status, and life experience. Now, let's look into the origins. Usually, when discussing ancient Egypt, we mention its most famous periods, the Ptolemaic era and the New Kingdom. Indeed, many of the main copies date from these times. But the key word here is main. The earliest known fragment of the Book of the Dead was found in the Pyramid of Pharaohs from the 5th dynasty, dated to the 24th century BCE. This is already a full text, leading us to believe that earlier versions might have existed but did not survive. From a historical perspective, this is more like a precursor to the Book of the Dead. In this earlier text, the focus was not on the afterlife for all the dead, but on how the pharaoh could become a god, ascend to the sky, and join the gods. This suggests that, in those times, the Book of the Dead was a privilege exclusive to pharaohs. However, there might have been other versions for lower social strata, but they did not reach us. From the 20th century BCE onward, spells from the Book of the Dead began appearing in the coffins of nobility, and not just pharaohs. These copies can be considered predecessors, as the spells and rituals in them match. Pyramid and coffin texts are often called early editions of the Book of the Dead. Coffin texts are closer to the version we are familiar with today. In these texts, the focus shifts from the sky to the underworld of Osiris, with descriptions of his judgment, prayers, and rituals that help the deceased pass through the trials. Around the 14th to 15th centuries BCE, the Book of the Dead took its familiar form and became accessible to broader segments of the population. It started being found even in the tombs of the poor, who could afford cheaper mummification. It's known that those who could not buy a copy tried at least to hear or memorize it. This was an important part of preparing for the afterlife. For pharaohs, priests, and nobles, this preparation wasn't as urgent, but for ordinary people, it was crucial. No one wants to get lost in the land of the dead. In addition, people took care of their tombs, coffins, mummification, and accumulating wealth. The more wealth they stored, the more they could take into the afterlife. After death, the body was mummified. The process is well known, but let's look at it in more detail. In wealthy cases, embalmers acted as gods and their assistants, performing the process according to the myth of Osiris's death and resurrection. The deceased was wrapped in bandages, salted, internal organs removed, except the heart, which was left for the afterlife. The body was cleaned and placed with its face to the west, where the sun set, into the realm of the dead. In the tomb, besides the Book of the Dead, everything necessary for the afterlife was placed: clothes, amulets, cosmetics, food, money, furniture, and even figurines of servants, if they existed in life. During the first year, offerings of food and other tributes were regularly brought to the deceased. In Egyptian belief, the afterlife was not an end but merely a transition to the realm of Osiris. The concept of the soul was quite complex. It consisted of 9 parts. The first was the Ka, or double. The Ka exists not only in humans but in all living beings. This explains why offerings in temples and tombs remained untouched. The double, not the person himself, consumed the sacrificial bread. The second part is the Ba, representing spirit, conscience, and emotions. The Ba leaves the body during sleep and flies around the world, which explains dreams. The third part is the Ah, which is the Ba after death. The Ah is the soul that has fully left the body, a sort of ghost. The fourth part is the Hat, the mortal body, which, even in death, they tried to preserve. The fifth part is the Ibt, the heart soul. It was this part that Osiris weighed on the scales. The subsequent parts are the Savu, Sikkim, and Shuwit. Shem is force or magical energy, Shuwit is a shadow or reflection, Savu is a spirit that remains in the tomb with the body. The ninth part is the Run, the name. It is necessary to keep the name alive, otherwise, the soul would become lost in the land of the dead. This concept resembles the plot of the animated film Coco. The name was important not only after death but also during life, as it could be used for prayers and curses. Finally, the journey of an Egyptian after death, if mummification was successful and the soul did not lose its parts, it would board the solar bark array and set off across the heavens into the netherworld of Duat. There, the soul must pass numerous trials with the help of spells from the Book of the Dead. If successful, it would appear before the gods Osiris, Ma'at, Thoth, Anubis, Ammit, and the 42 judges. Note that Osiris was often depicted as a mummy, but in tomb illustrations, he appeared in festive attire to greet the deceased. The deceased must recite a speech, confess sins, or proclaim innocence. If the gods detect a lie, it could lead to dire consequences. The soul then proceeds to the weighing scales, or its heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, truth. If the heart is lighter than the feather, the person enters the perfect Egypt, a paradise. If heavier, Ammit devours the heart, and the soul is condemned to oblivion. The Egyptians knew nothing of hell, they believed only in paradise or oblivion. This concept of resurrection, divine judgment, and safeguarding the name was adopted by neighboring peoples and influenced early Christianity. Many terms used to describe law, the soul, paradise, and judgment have been preserved in modern language and are nearly 5,000 years old. So, to be prepared for the afterlife, learn the spells and get yourself a scarab. Until next time, friends.